Hare Om Namaha. Quote, now, after the death of Pandu, there was conspiracy. Dhritarashtra wanted that, actually, this is my kingdom. Now, somehow or other, I could not get it. Now my brother is dead. So if I do not inherit, why not my sons? This was the politics. Politics are always there, and enviousness, jealousy. This is the nature of this material world. You cannot avoid it. Spiritual world means just the opposite. There is no politics, there is no jealousy, there is no enviousness. That is spiritual world. And material world means politics, jealousy, diplomacy, enviousness, so many things, unquote. Quote, I'm sorry to learn that there is some sort of conspiracy by some of our God brothers as not to give me a place in Mayapur, unquote. And now, an excerpt from a letter to a leading secretary who was involved in the conspiracy being talked about in the excerpt. Quote, now by the grace of Krishna, we have got sufficient properties all over the world, so there cannot be any diplomacy or conspiracy by any sane man. All these properties and opulences, whatever we have got, this will not go with me when I go away from this world. It will remain here. I am training some of my experienced disciples how to manage after my departure. So, if instead of taking the training, if in my lifetime you people say, I am the Lord of all I survey, that is dangerous conspiracy, unquote. That was an excerpt from a letter in December 1972. So we've read 3 of these excerpts. These are obviously all from His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Each of them has a disturbing element to it, particularly the last one. Conspiracy eventually became endemic to Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement. In 1977, if you saw a picture of him, you would wonder how he was still maintaining life in that emaciated form. Of course, the overwhelming majority of devotees never saw such pictures because the leaders knew that it was against their interest for the rank and file to see how debilitated Prabhupada's condition was. Why? That is quite self-evident. Anyone viewing those pictures of him in the final year, and particularly the final months and days, would conclude that he would be leaving the scene soon. Many of those viewing the pictures would depart and go to India to be with him. Indeed, he did leave soon. The secrecy penchant of the vitiated GBC was well established since 1972. Quote, Sriman Atreya Rishi Das may be very expert, but without my say, he has been given so much power, and this has upset my brain. I also understand that immediate actions are going to take place even prior to my permission, and that also, quote, without divulging to the devotees, unquote, with an exclamation. I do not follow exactly what is the motive of the so-called GBC meeting. Therefore, I have sent the telegram, which you will find attached herewith, and I have received the replies as well. Under these circumstances, I authorize, these are in caps from here on in, I authorize you to disregard, for the time being, any decision from the GBC men until my further instruction, unquote. This was from an identical letter sent to all temple presidents accompanied by a telegram on April 8, 1972, suspending the authority of the GBC. It all went back down to the presidents where it was previous to the formation of the GBC in 1970. For those of you who are listening only and do not have access to the teleprompter text, Prabhupada had his personal secretary type out what he said into the dictaphone onto a hard copy letter. This is well known. Prabhupada distinctly ordered in this particular letter that there be an insert of that exclamation point after without divulging to the devotees. In other words, it was not inserted by your host speaker, but it was in the original text of the letter. Another way of saying the same thing is that the GBC penchant for secrecy deeply disturbed Prabhupada. Now, we see that there was a major conspiracy back in a millennium from deep antiquity after Pandu, who was the rightful king, met his unexpected demise due to a curse from a man in the form of a stag that Pandu had killed. Pandu's line of monarchical succession would be through his sons, his known sons, of course. The eldest was Yudhishthira, so he was supposed to be the rightful next king. But Yudhishthira's nemesis, Duryodhana, in league with his father and some others, had different ideas. Dhritarashtra was older than Pandu, but Dhritarashtra was born blind. The stricture was, in Vedic days, that the king or emperor had to have all of his senses in full working order. He could not be deaf or dumb or crippled or blind. It was a good rule, and it was supposed to be honored and upheld. As such, the second son, Pandu, who had all of his senses in powerful order, was the one who was eligible to become king. However, Dhritarashtra still considered himself the king because he was the eldest. And if he was right and he was the king, which he was not, then, when Dhritarashtra left the scene, the monarchical line of regal succession would have passed to his eldest son, Duryodhana. The 5 Pandavas stood in the way, however. Thus, there was a conspiracy as to how to eliminate them from the monarchical succession, despite the fact that Duryodhana was managing the whole kingdom very well as the de facto, but not the de jure king, since Dhritarashtra could not do so due to his major physical defect. The issue here, obviously, is conspiracy. The whole of the Mahabharata is based upon that very conspiracy. We could very easily fill this month's podcast with an explanation of the tale of that conspiracy. However, it would not be in accord with our current focus on this multi-part series. Our focus is upon the various chapters of Henry Doktorsky's most important treatise to date, known as 11 Naked Emperors, which will be referred to hereinafter as ENE. And we have done some before, but now we've reached chapter 5 of his work. It is a short chapter entitled, quote, a takeover conspiracy, unquote. So let us dig into it. You should not at all be surprised that some kind of secret conspiracy developed a bit after Prabhupada left physical manifestation. It is the way of the world, as was pointed out in that excerpt, which we quoted at the start of our broadcast. Perhaps a conspiracy was developing even before Prabhupada departed physical manifestation. Perhaps one really heated up just a day or two before he departed, when it appeared certain that he would do so. However, there's no question that one developed after he departed physical manifestation. E.N.E. gets into some examples of the scuttlebutt connected to all three of these possibilities, with the last one being the only certainty. First, however, E.N.E. begins this chapter 5 with a quote from Aristotle. Quote, "The least deviation from the truth is multiplied later 1,000-fold," unquote. Whoa, how super excellent this aphorism is. That is one of the ways that the Maya works. Some small deviation to begin with, getting its foot in the door, then some adjunct related to it, usually a bit tangentially, in order to expand it. Then it grows and grows. Then it becomes accepted as the standard. What an excellent aphorism to introduce the chapter, because that's exactly how the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation went down. In the beginning of this chapter, E.N.E. goes through a number of rumors about the developing situation, about the conspiracy that we all know had to have gone down eventually. Obviously, there will be all kinds of opinions about these rumors. We shall never, or probably never, get any verification of substance from the conspirators themselves for a number of reasons. Some of them are dead. The rest are now old. They are dying off. And most importantly, the old guard protects its own. Also, aside from this, the conspirators who manipulated everything in the first place know that if they come clean, that will not be appreciated. It would only be appreciated by a minority of devotees, such as your host speaker. The vast majority of the current many thousands of improperly initiated bhaktas and bhaktins will not only not appreciate anyone from the old guard revealing anything about the conspiracy to replace Prabhupada as imitation successors, they will want to tear anyone who does so limb from limb. As such, although little here from the rumors, which we're quoting from E.N.E., can be considered definitive, let us analyze some examples of what is remembered, either rightly or wrongly, about how the whole debacle was formulated, how it went down, when, who was involved, etc. There's one example presented in E.N.E. from a personal servant of Sudama. It appears that Sudama was approached in advance about how the conspiracy to replace Prabhupada should best play out. This personal servant, this fellow's name is Ramachandra Das, almost certainly a direct initiate of Prabhupada. Quote, "Sudama Prabhu revealed to me that the day before Prabhupada departed from us, all of the ISKCON leaders, including Satsvarup Maharaj, the other original ISKCON gurus and other leaders, met together to discuss how to divide up the world. Sudama Prabhu told me that Tamal Krishna Maharaj and another sannyasi approached him and said, 'There is going to be a meeting in which we are going to divide up the world. Don't go anywhere. You should be there,' unquote. Yashodanandana Das and Bhakta Das validated Ramachandra's remembrance on the meeting before and after Prabhupada left the scene. Perhaps they do not agree on the timing of it, but they agree on the conspiracy itself. Yet, it was all based upon the false presupposition that when Prabhupada named, which means appointed, the Ritviks, he simultaneously appointed them as initiating spiritual masters for the future when he disappeared. The other leaders were led by TKG to believe this. Swami B.R. Sridhar buttressed this presupposition, and it was passed down line to the rank and file, accepted as an unquestionable and undeniable fact. And E&E presents a sentence in this chapter which summarizes that very situation. Quote, "As far as I know, we still have the tape of Prabhupada naming gurus to initiate on his behalf while he was with us, and then to be regular gurus afterwards," unquote. Oh, how false that statement is. Loaded with prevarication, either intentional or unintentional. How absolutely ridiculous that statement is. Yet that's what everybody believed. When it came to breaking down this conspiracy in terms of taking over the movement as Diksha gurus, which none of them were, the cutting edge or raw nerve of this loose plot would be the who. Who was going to be the Diksha gurus? The beginning of chapter 5 centers upon Sudama Das, how he was approached to take part in the plan and how he wanted no part of it. Obviously, the record of how it went down, including the timing of Sudama's rejection, is subject to controversy. E&E discusses it in the following way on page 108 of the book. Quote, "Sudama's story of the alleged takeover plot is inconsistent in at least 3 regards. 1. Puranjan, Ramachandra, and Yashodanandan offer 3 different dates for this alleged conversation between Sudama and Tamal and Bhavananda. Puranjan claims it was May 1977. Yashodanandan claims it was August 1977. And Ramachandra claims it was November 13th, 1977. According to some sources, at least 2 other senior godbrothers besides Sudama Maharaj and a 4th godbrother a couple of years later were also offered the position of Diksha Guru by some of the ISKCON gurus, but they refused the offer. And E&E lists 2 of them, Achyutananda Swami and Guru Kripa. Although not specifically mentioned in E&E, we should consider Akshayananda. He was the temple president of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. He was part of the contingent that opposed the 11 great pretenders in that first rebellion of the winter of 1979, the debate face-off between Hridayananda and Pradyumna. As you may remember, and as I've reported, it was abruptly brought to an end by the bellicosity of Hridayananda. It was held at Raman Reddy, but the whole thing degenerated very quickly, mostly because Pradyumna was winning. At any rate, it's very likely that when the conspiracy idea was being bandied about, that Akshayananda would have been approached. However, it would be tangential to get into any specifics about that here, because that would be a rumor also, and it bears mentioning that Akshayananda was against the new gurus and was part of the last men standing group there in India which opposed how they took over. He soon thereafter joined the Mahamandala and left so-called ISKCON entirely as an incorrigible enemy. Now we'll get to Achyutananda. He was the first devotee at Tompkins Square Park to dance to Prabhupada's drumbeat. He was and remains a very special and devoted transcendentalist. He is a man of knowledge and occult experience. He is renounced and was anything but a favorite of the powerful misleaders of so-called ISKCON, absorbed in profit, adoration, distinction, and power over God brothers and God sisters. That he is reported in E&E to have refused some kind of initial overture makes complete sense and tallies well with all of his divine proclivities and influence. As far as Guru Kripa is concerned, he was the biggest of the black sheep. Without question, he was one of Prabhupada's pet disciples. He was a very rough guy, but he was also capable of tapasya. And simultaneous to that, but in a completely different mode, he was capable of physical enjoyment with the opposite sex. Some thought that his face resembled Steve McQueen, and Guru Kripa made this thought known also, although I personally couldn't see it. He was a great kirtan man. In the opinion of your host speaker, the greatest kirtan men were Madhudvisha, Guru Kripa, and Hansaduta, the latter also being a great bhajan singer. Guru Kripa personally told me, at that time when the zonal imposition was going down, that he was approached by TKG on the subject of his, Guru Kripa, becoming guru. Although I do not remember all of the specifics of my exchange with him in this anecdote, it centered around a proposal from TKG that Guru Kripa was just too controversial and too disliked by too many leaders in order to be named to the original contingent of so-called initiating spiritual masters. And I knew from practical experience that Guru Kripa was despised, especially by Satsvarupa and Rupanuga. When TKG explained to Guru Kripa how the rest of the new gurus thought he should act in relation to their guru takeover, I do remember Guru Kripa saying to me the following, quote, Tamal is telling me that if I just wait a year and keep my nose clean, that I will be named guru then. Yet, although TKG was supposed to be a perfect guru like Prabhupada, he could not even see that I wasn't even following the regulative principles when he was talking to me, unquote. Now we'll get to another personality who should be discussed, significantly discussed, because Swarup Damodar is mentioned in Chapter 5. He was against the Guru appointment scam, what we also accurately peg as the appointment conspiracy, and he was against it during the 1978 GBC Asat Sabha in Mayapur at the annual meeting, the conclave. Swarup Damodar proposed a 5-year waiting period before anyone initiated anybody. His proposed resolution was voted down 22-1. Swarup Damodar, however, and in flagrant contradiction to his brave stand in 1978 at Mayapur, at the conclave, accepted an appointment to guru by vote in the very early 80s. I have personal experience of this man in Atlanta when I was Balavanta's personal secretary there in 1978 until May of that year. Swarup Damodar Swami had a profile as a gentle sadhu, but he was quite the politician. I had experience of this, personal experience. Once his 5-year proposal got voted down, he went on a kind of rampage via international phone calls to others who were left out of the Guru Club. This especially included Gopal Krishna, a fellow GBC of Southeast Indian birth. I was privy to this because Swarup Damodar's room was catty-cornered to mine on the second floor of the building at the top of the hill there on Ponce de Leon in Atlanta. I was also privy to it because Swarup Damodar left his door open for some reason. Some say he's a friendly man. Maybe he was a friendly guy, I don't know. But I do know that he was not at all friendly to me. And he was politicking for Guru like anything at that time. It paid off for him a few years later, obviously. He died young. It is virtually certain that he accepted Uttama Adhikari worship from his disciples once he was part of the first wave, after the 11 great pretenders, to be voted in as a guru, along with Gopal Krishna and another man. That 5-year waiting proposal that he submitted to his comrades at the Asat Sabha may have actually been a disguised objection to the first wave of 11 gurus, not including any Southeast Asian sannyasis, no Indians, all Americans, and 6 of the 11 Jews. E then goes on to briefly and correctly describe that the first actual schism in the movement was the Siddha Swarup breakaway. Although Siddha did not have that much influence in the movement, he was also a black sheep like Guru Kripa. But he was certainly different from Guru Kripa because Guru Kripa was a member of the GBC, and to some extent, as limited as it might have been, he cooperated with the GBC. Siddha did not. Guru Kripa received his commissioner zone from the governing body. That was not a guru zone, that was commission. Siddha Swarup, a.k.a. Siddha Swarupananda, never was in a state of cooperation with either ISKCON or the GBC. In fact, he despised the GBC. He was a charismatic guru even before he became initiated by Prabhupada in the early 70s. For all practical purposes, he was doing his own thing both before and after his initiation. His stomping grounds, or his preaching area, was Hawaii and the Philippines. He had no institutional charisma, but he was loaded with personal charisma. He was anti-Sanskrit, and he surfed regularly. He had a sweet bhajan with his own catchy tune, which no one else sung or emulated. And he was sometimes prone to use his Western name. On many of his cassettes, they were labeled, quote, Chris Butler Speaks, unquote. Guru Kripa and Madhusha loathed him. Tattvamasi. Just as the 11 gurus were tying up their plan, word circulated as to how it would go down. In other words, word got out. I heard about it, Siddha heard about it, and some of the rest heard about it. Siddha, however, acted immediately. He wrote, had printed, and had distributed the first issue of his Haribol News. There was no internet back in the day, of course. This Haribol News 6-page pamphlet boldly declared that all of those new gurus would spend 10,000 years as worms in stool for what they were doing. E discusses how, previous to that, Siddha had attended the burial ceremony of Prabhupada at the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Siddha was an outcast, but none of the major players, what to speak of the rank and file, was going to try to prevent him from attending. He did not want to speak, but according to E, Hridayananda persuaded him to do so to the assembly for the 1977 salt burial conducted by Swami Narayan. We shall simply point out that Siddha stated in his brief lecture, platform lecture, that Guru is never appointed. Guru is only by qualification, not appointment. Siddha stated that, correctly and succinctly, he stated, that Prabhupada didn't appoint gurus. This was against what became the institutional propaganda swallowed by everybody else. Siddha also made the bold statement certainly rejected by all of the upper echelon of air quotes ISKCON leaders, that all of Prabhupada's initiated disciples were automatically, if qualified, duty-bound to be gurus in their own right after Prabhupada departed. This radical assertion was not made available on any basis whatsoever throughout the movement for obvious reasons, because it was 100% against the monopoly based on a loose conspiracy that the vitiated GBC, led by TKG, was in the process of formulating and forming. And after that burial ceremony, Siddha was never part of ISKCON in any way, shape, or form after it. Now, you may know or you may not know, but Siddha took the title of Prabhupada as of early 1978. This means that he declared himself the successor in the line, although Prabhupada never declared him as such. He was the first breakaway, unless you include and consider your host speaker, of course. Previous to the Asat Sabha of the vitiated GBC, the conclave, in the spring of 1978, only Kirtanananda acted upon what was wrongly considered to be the appointment of future Diksha Gurus in July of 1977. Everyone else had different opinions of how things should best play out, so the conspiracy was anything but tight. It was in a kind of formulation stage that was basically more dormant than it was not. Satsvarup, for example, and this is pointed out in E&E, was opining that the new gurus should not be worshipped inside the ISKCON temples, and there were other opinions which were different from that, from others. Everything was in flux for a while, and then it wasn't. In other words, not for long. We find the following quote published in a BTG, a double issue, and it's reproduced in E&E. Quote, "The double issue of BTG announces 11 gurus, but curiously, in the same issue, Back to Godhead published an excerpt from a conversation with Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada recorded 12 days before his passing, in which he emphatically declared that he did not appoint any specific persons as successor acharyas. Quote, 'It's not that I'll give an order, here is the next leader,' Prabhupada insisted. 'Anyone who follows the previous leadership is a leader,' unquote. Unfortunately, no one at that time, it seems, noted this paradox. How could Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada allegedly have appointed 11 successors and also claimed that he did not appoint any successors? In retrospect, it appears that the 11 had pulled the wool over nearly everyone's eyes in ISKCON, unquote. It seems? Of course not. The statement by Prabhupada, quoted in the excerpt, that he only appointed Ritviks, was entirely ignored and merged into oblivion. It would only have been a paradox if it had been well known and had been made well known, which it certainly was not. In the final days, Prabhupada also corrected one of his younger godbrothers, when that godbrother, Puri Maharaj, said that Prabhupada had appointed 11 gurus but should have instead simply appointed one successor. Prabhupada corrected him, saying that he did not appoint gurus but only appointed Ritviks. But this was also not made known to anybody. Undeniably, the 11 great pretenders had pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, and it was quite effective. We all believed that Prabhupada had appointed 11 spiritual masters, although he had not done so. Now, we argued against how they set up their outrageous worship of themselves, but we did not dispute that Prabhupada had appointed them. That was because we did not have information. And that was intentional on the part of all the, air quotes, ISKCON leaders who benefited from the scam, particularly those 11. Instead, what wound up being quibbled about was how the quote-unquote non-Guru Godbrothers were to relate and to view the quote-unquote Guru Godbrothers in terms of perspective, a completely irrelevant tangent. This side trip centered around their own disciples viewing them as absolute, while the Godbrothers were allowed to view them from a relative perspective. Or as Swami B.R. Sridhar, with another of his poisonous tropes, put it, quote, "It is to deceive the disciple," unquote. And then there's another tangent here, which E&E mentions. Quote, "Yet each guru also had godbrothers who related to them not on the absolute platform, but on the relative platform. How could this paradox be reconciled?" Unquote. E&E then adds, quote, "In addition, the 11 knew that they would not be able to see or relate to each other as absolute authorities." What a laugher that is. Let me read it again. "In addition, the 11 knew that they would not be able to see or relate to each other as absolute authorities." Oh, I could go off on this. Woo. We'll continue with the excerpt. "What would happen if they disagreed and fought with each other?" Oh, this is getting laughable. "How could conflicts between the gurus be resolved?" Conflicts between the gurus. "How could conflicts between the gurus be resolved if they were all supposed to be perfect and infallible beings? What would be the relationship between the gurus and the GBC, and between the gurus themselves? Each guru considered himself an autocrat and his geographic zone of influence as his personal autocracy. Yet they were also supposed to cooperate together for the propagation of the worldwide ISKCON preaching mission," unquote. So-called ISKCON devised an anti-Vaishnav system of roping off sectors of the world into zones run exclusively and enjoyed exclusively by princes in their own principalities, and they became to be known, according to Swami B.R. Sridhar, who gave this bad advice in the first place, as, quote, "acharyas of the zone," unquote. This was the alleged solution to all of the potential problems that would ensue. Some of those problems were just mentioned in the above excerpt and here in chapter 5. To say that the excerpt itself is comprehensive is a bridge too far, but it certainly brings up many salient points of cult contention, and some of those points are humorous. Each and every one of those problems surfaced, as did any number of others, but all of those were supposed to be resolved by each acharya in his zone, as long as he was cooperating with the others. The issue of cooperation was made paramount, and for a brief time it was quite effective. A very brief time. Everyone should cooperate with the new gurus. Everyone should cooperate with what the vitiated GBC had devised as Prabhupada's plan for his movement. Cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. It was bandied about constantly in the late 70s as the be-all and end-all for everybody and everything. But was it cooperation, that the zonals and their henchmen really were after? Certainly not. Instead, cooperation was the buzzword disguising the real mandate. Simply accept. I heard it through the devotee grapevine that when the 11 gurus got together, and it may not have been just them, but perhaps some other governing commissioners, they discussed how the new arrangement of the zonal acharya imposition was to be explained to the devotees worldwide. And in this anecdote that I heard, apparently one of the new gurus asked the group, "How should we explain all of this?" To which Bhavananda is said to have replied, "Don't explain anything. Simply tell them." Chapter 5 goes on to discuss, in advance of when they actually went down, what the potential problems could be if the GBC proceeded and divided the world into 11 fiefdoms. Obviously, this was being talked about as a possibility before it was even voted into kinetic existence. Yeni brought one possible chief contention up. Quote, "An autocracy cannot succeed if there is more than one autocrat. Two or more will inevitably issue conflicting orders and cause chaos. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada knew that better than anyone. If he had intended to choose a new acharya to rule ISKCON, he might have chosen only one, not 11, unquote." Yes, this is an important point. The Machiavellian manipulator, and most of you know that's TKG, with effective help from Swami B.R. Sridhar, bamboozled everyone into believing as fact, although it was nothing more than a presupposition and a false one at that, that the Ritviks automatically were parlayed into full-blown Diksha gurus after Prabhupada left. Oh yeah, and this got converted into the alleged fact, based upon another related and just as false presupposition, that Prabhupada appointed 11 men as gurus. Oh yeah, then that got converted into those 11 men being worshipped by everyone, including their godbrothers and godsisters as Mahabhagavats. And that got converted into 11 successors. Then because all of these mega autocrats absorbed in self-apotheosis could not possibly get along and not be immediately at each other's throats, the successor scam required each of the princes possessing their own principalities, in which they became known as zonal acharyas. Remember early in this podcast, I mentioned how something small, and this was in relation with Aristotle's quote, something small gets magnified thousands of times over. That's exactly what went down. You see it now? Get the picture? The not very significant rejuvenation of the Ritvik process of initiation in July of 1977 got blown up into this whole thing. Why? Well, the guru must be seen by his disciples as absolute. The guru must be seen as good as God. All gurus must be that. Or as the Navadvip Mahant put it, it is to deceive the disciple, and not just improperly initiated disciples. It was to deceive everybody interconnected to their then deviated movement, which we rightly call the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. It was all a big lie. Most of this is now known. However, try to get some perspective of how outrageous the whole scam was at that time, and how in the dark virtually everyone was kept, and not by choice. And so let us segue to consider what set all of this outrage into motion. It was primarily the dark duo of the worst men in the movement, and those two men were named Kirtanananda and TKG. Do not forget that TKG, as the so-called caretaker of Prabhupada, decided who could see and talk to him in the last months that he was with us. Do not forget that he disallowed any sannyasis to seek clarification of just how the movement was to be carried on after that botched interview of late May 1977. However, someone had to make the first move on the chessboard in order to force the issue. That someone was, as could only have been expected, Kirtanananda. After all, TKG was the epitome of a party man. He did not rely upon personal charisma because he didn't have very much. He had the personal charisma of black salt. However, he had plenty of institutional charisma, and he claimed that he knew what Prabhupada wanted. On the other hand, Kirtanananda, like Hansaduta, had a lot of personal charisma, although quite a bit of it was, let us say, a bit on the dreadful side. In one sense, the die was cast before that fateful meeting of the conclave, the Asat Sabha in Mayapur, at the GBC annual meeting, because Kirtanananda jumped the gun. And by doing so, he set a high bar. As E&E put it, quote, Kirtanananda saw no need to hesitate and boldly initiated his first disciples at a 1977 Christmas Day fire sacrifice at New Vrindavan, less than 6 weeks after Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's passing. His act was in defiance of his godbrothers. Whether he would be disciplined or at least chastised by his godbrothers 3 months later during the annual GBC meetings of March 1978 remained to be seen, unquote. He wasn't, and he was the eldest of the 11. He had only inmates at his Moundsville compound. He loathed his godbrothers and held them in utter disregard. He never applied any of their decisions to his personal playground. He was the supreme there. Had anyone ever seen Kirtanananda pay an obeisance to any other sannyasi? He immediately began to take Uttama Adhikari worship because he knew he could do it. He immediately, without consultation with any godbrothers or with the GBC body, began initiating new disciples less than 2 months after Prabhupada departed physical manifestation. Why? Because he knew he could do it. And he knew it well, that nobody could stop him, or even attempt to stop him. And anyway, what did he care? He did not care if the GBC decided to formally chastise him at Mayapur. By that time, his well-populated community would be functioning exactly according to plan. He would then declare himself no longer part of the, air quotes, ISKCON movement or its governing body. He would go rogue, since he already was rogue. And there was at least a 50-50 chance they would follow his lead, and that's exactly how it played out. He gambled through the dice, and it came up 11. He was the leading edge. He was the man. And the others were, as he actually called them, his, quote-unquote, 10 little Indian boys. Now, you need to understand that Chapter 5 of E&E is not an essential chapter of the book. Some of the information in it could have been included in the chapters preceding and following it. Much of it discussed rumors of the conspiracy, and there were contradictions in such anecdotal evidence. There was a loose conspiracy, but exactly how it went down has merged into the annals of oblivion. It is now basically in the category of rumors only. Now, some of you have heard of the National Football League. There's a saying in the NFL, you can only win against whatever is put up in front of you. Sometimes a team's upcoming schedule will include 3 weak teams in a row as opponents. As such, the superior team racks up 3 wins. What could have been done about it? Those were the teams they had on the docket by the NFL schedule maker. Those were the inferior teams they had to beat, and those were the teams they did beat. What's the point of this analogy? It's this. The segue of what Chapter 5 includes had to find a place in the book. Doktorsky realized this, and he included, as a chapter, the research he made, the excellent research he made on all of these factors and rumors, and he labeled the whole thing as a conspiracy. It was a loose conspiracy in the making, one which got modified significantly and firmed up in the spring of 1978. As such, I do not grade Doktorsky on the subject matter. He researched it well and he wrote it up well. I shall only grade the chapter in terms of its cogency and accuracy. It meets the standard, and I therefore give it a straight A. The colossal hoax, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, is a pseudo-spiritual scam. Carnival dogs have consumed the line. The whole tragedy is a result of dishonesty combined with secrecy. Its record is quite hellish. It is also the result of blowing way out of proportion something, the Rivik appointments, into something that they never were and never were meant to be. It is the result of a loose conspiracy that took shape and then devastated everything. 11 seeds of personal ambition, the seeds of so-called ISKCON, required fertile soil in which to sprout. They got that nutrient-rich mix in the immediate aftermath of Prabhupada's disappearance. This created the ISKCON movement, quote-unquote ISKCON. It is what their record says it is. Sadeva Samya.